Have you ever worked more than 40 hours in a week, looked at your paycheck and thought, wait a second, where's my overtime? Maybe your boss told you, we don't pay overtime here, or you're salaried so it doesn't apply. This is one of the biggest sources of confusion and abuse in American workplaces. Here's the truth. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, most employees are entitled to time and a half pay for hours worked beyond 40 in a single work week. An employer can't simply refuse to pay you for that time. If they do, they may be violating federal law, and, in some states, additional state laws too. In today's video, I'll break down 5 key things you need to know about overtime pay, when you're entitled to it, the excuses employers use to deny it, how state laws can add extra protection, and what you can do if your paycheck comes up short. Part 1. The federal rule. Overtime is mandatory for non-exempt workers. The starting point is simple. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, most employees must be paid 1.5 times their regular hourly rate for every hour worked over 40 hours in a work week. This is not optional. It's a federal requirement. If you're a non-exempt employee, meaning you're covered by the FLSA, your employer cannot legally refuse to pay overtime. It doesn't matter if they don't budget for overtime or never authorize overtime. If you worked the hours, you must be paid for them. For example, say you earn $18 an hour and worked 48 hours in 1 week. The first 40 hours should be paid at $18, and the extra 8 hours should be paid at $27 per hour. If your employer just pays you $18 for all 48 hours, that's a violation of federal law. Some employers try to avoid this by putting workers on a salary and telling them you're exempt. But the law doesn't work that way. Being salaried doesn't automatically make you exempt from overtime. To be exempt, you have to meet both the salary threshold, currently $684 per week, $35,568 annually, and specific job duty tests for executive, administrative, professional, outside sales, or certain computer employees. If you don't meet those tests, you're still owed overtime, even if you're paid a salary. The Department of Labor makes it clear, employers can't waive or ignore overtime requirements. Even if you agree verbally to work for a flat rate without overtime, the law still requires that overtime be paid. Employees can't sign away their right to overtime. And remember, the FLSA also requires employers to keep accurate records of hours worked. If they don't, courts often accept the employee's reasonable estimate of hours when deciding back pay claims. So the bottom line at the federal level is this. If you're non-exempt and you work more than 40 hours in a week, overtime is your legal right. Employers cannot legally refuse to pay. It's not up for negotiation. Part 2. Common excuses employers use to deny overtime. When workers complain about missing overtime, many employers fall back on a set of familiar excuses. The problem is, most of these excuses simply don't hold up under the law. One of the most common is, we didn't authorize those extra hours, so we don't have to pay you. The Department of Labor is crystal clear on this. If the work was performed, the employer must pay for it, even if it was not pre-approved. The employer can discipline an employee for breaking company policy by working unauthorized hours, but they cannot refuse to pay for the time worked. Another excuse is, you're salaried, so overtime doesn't apply. As we explained earlier, salary status alone doesn't determine exemption. Many salaried employees, especially those earning below the federal salary threshold, are still legally entitled to overtime. Employers often misuse job titles like assistant manager to make employees think they're exempt, when, in fact, their primary duties don't meet the exemption test. Some employers say, we pay comp time instead of overtime. Compensatory time, or comp time, is generally only allowed in the public sector. Private sector employers must pay overtime in cash wages, not in future time off. Offering comp time in place of overtime pay is a violation of federal law. A particularly troubling excuse is, you agreed to a flat weekly rate. Even if an employee signs an agreement to work 50 or 60 hours for a flat salary, that doesn't erase the legal right to overtime. Courts have consistently ruled that workers cannot waive or sign away overtime rights. The law overrides private agreements that try to deny workers their pay. Finally, some employers try to dodge overtime by misclassifying workers as independent contractors. If your employer controls when and how you work, provides the tools, and directs your daily tasks, you may legally be an employee, even if they call you a contractor. In that case, you're entitled to overtime if you meet the other criteria. These excuses may sound convincing in the moment, especially if you don't know the law. But once you understand the rules, you'll see that most of the common justifications for withholding overtime simply don't stand up. If you worked the hours, you're owed the pay. Part 3. State laws that strengthen overtime rights. Federal law sets the baseline, but many states have gone further to protect workers when it comes to overtime. These state laws can make a huge difference, especially for employees who regularly work long shifts. Take California, for example. California not only requires overtime after 40 hours in a week, but also after 8 hours in a single day. Work more than 12 hours in a day, and you may even qualify for double time. That means if you worked a 14-hour day, 4 of those hours would be paid at double your regular hourly rate. Colorado also has daily overtime rules. Under the Colorado Overtime and Minimum Pay Standards Order, employees earn overtime after 12 hours in a day or after 40 in a week. Alaska and Nevada have similar daily overtime protections. Another area where state law adds protection is in industries that are excluded under federal law. For example, while the FLSA exempts most farm workers from overtime, New York and California now extend overtime protections to agricultural employees. These states recognize that farm work often involves grueling hours, and workers deserve fair pay for that extra time. Some states also provide stronger penalties when employers refuse to pay overtime. In Massachusetts, for instance, employees who successfully sue for unpaid wages, including overtime, are entitled to triple damages plus attorney's fees. That means if your employer owes you $2,000 in unpaid overtime, the court could order them to pay you $6,000. These enhanced remedies are designed to discourage wage theft. It's also worth mentioning that certain cities have added protections on top of state law. For example, New York City's Fair Workweek law doesn't just cover scheduling, it also indirectly reinforces overtime rights by requiring employers to provide stable schedules to fast food and retail workers, making it harder to manipulate hours to avoid paying overtime. The takeaway here is that depending on where you live, you may have more rights than the federal minimum. California, Colorado, Alaska, Nevada, New York, Massachusetts. These are just some of the places where workers have stronger protections. If your employer refuses to pay overtime, knowing your state law can be the difference between losing out and winning back what you're owed, sometimes with penalties. Part 4. Legal consequences for employers and how workers can file complaints. When an employer refuses to pay overtime, it isn't just unfair. It can carry serious legal consequences. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, failing to pay overtime is considered a form of wage theft, and the penalties can be steep. If the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, WHD, investigates and finds violations, employers may be required to pay employees all the back wages they are owed. On top of that, the law often requires payment of an equal amount in liquidated damages. In other words, if you are owed $1,000 in unpaid overtime, your employer could be ordered to pay you $2,000. Employers can also face civil penalties of up to $1,000 per violation and, in extreme or repeated cases, even criminal charges. Beyond money, refusing to pay overtime damages an employer's reputation and can lead to class action lawsuits if multiple employees are affected. So how can workers fight back? The first step is to document everything. Keep copies of pay stubs, timesheets, schedules, and even texts or emails that show when you worked. If your employer isn't tracking hours properly, your own records may be used as evidence. Courts have ruled that in the absence of accurate employer records, a worker's reasonable estimate of hours can be enough. Next, you can file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. This agency investigates wage violations and has the authority to recover back pay. Complaints can be filed confidentially, and you don't need a lawyer to start the process. Many states also have their own labor departments where you can file. If you prefer, you can also consult a private attorney and file a civil lawsuit. In some states, like Massachusetts, successful wage claims automatically entitle you to triple damages plus attorney's fees, which makes lawsuits especially powerful. Importantly, the law prohibits retaliation. Your employer cannot legally fire you, cut your hours, or punish you for asserting your right to overtime pay. If they do, that creates a separate legal violation with additional consequences. So, while some bosses may think they can get away with refusing to pay overtime, the reality is that the risks are high. Workers have tools, agencies, and courts on their side. And the penalties for employers who ignore the law can be far more costly than simply paying what's owed in the first place. Part 5. Real-world examples and how workers can protect themselves. Let's bring this down to real life, because unpaid overtime isn't just a legal concept. It affects millions of workers across industries every year. Picture this. A warehouse employee is told to clock out at the end of an 8-hour shift, but stay late to finish loading trucks. The employer thinks they're saving money by avoiding overtime. In reality, that's a textbook FLSA violation. Those extra hours must be paid at time and a half. Or consider a restaurant server who works 45 hours in a week but is told, your tips cover it, you don't get overtime. Wrong again. Tips don't erase overtime requirements. The worker's base wage and tip credit must be combined to calculate the regular rate, and any hours beyond 40 still require overtime pay. So, how can workers protect themselves? Track your hours. Don't rely only on your employer's records. Write down your start and end times daily, and keep copies of schedules. Check your pay stubs. Make sure overtime is clearly listed if you worked more than 40 hours. Know your classification. Don't assume salaried means exempt. If your pay is under the federal threshold, or your duties don't meet exemption tests, you probably qualify for overtime. Learn your state laws. If you live in places like California, Colorado, or New York, you may have extra rights, such as daily overtime or stronger penalties. Speak up. If something looks wrong, start with HR or management. If that doesn't work, agencies like the Department of Labor or your state's labor board are there to help. Real-world enforcement shows that workers can and do win. For example, in 2022, the Department of Labor recovered over $213 million in back wages for workers denied proper overtime and minimum wage. That's proof that when employees step forward, the system can deliver results. The reality is that refusing to pay overtime isn't just a gray area. In most cases, it's wage theft. And while some employers hope you won't notice or won't fight back, the law is clear. If you work the hours, you deserve the pay. So, can your employer refuse to pay you for overtime? The clear answer is no. Not if you're a non-exempt worker covered by the FLSA or by state laws. Overtime isn't a perk. It's your legal right. Employers who refuse to pay risk owing back wages, penalties, and even damages that can double what you're owed. Remember, excuses like "we didn't approve it," "you're salaried," or "we give comp time instead" don't erase the law. If you worked the hours, you're owed the pay. Period. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit like, share it with your coworkers, and subscribe for more plain English explanations of workplace rights. And let me know in the comments, have you ever worked overtime and been told you wouldn't be paid? Knowledge is power, and when it comes to your paycheck, knowing your rights is the first step to protecting them.